Hey guys, Dal here from Dal's Rigging and Crane Tips. A 2021, yeah. Sorry, I got my daughter's food over there, so don't worry. Anyway, got this sweet model crane from my mate Jake. Really good cunt, alright, top bloke. Hasn't been driving as long as me, but I often sometimes message him for technicals. So he's really eager, he's a really good crane operator. Really good dude. So thanks Jake for the model crane. The reason I'm doing the model crane is because I can't get logos of my employers or contractors' cranes in my videos. It's not fair on them, and they don't want to be associated with this, which is fair enough. But so we've got a model crane, just so I can get some points over to you guys. Alright, it's a Liebherr, so it's the proper make for sure, because Liebherrs are the best. But what we want to go over today, alright, and this is a big mistake from riggers, but it's easy. I used to be under the concept of this for a year or so. Some riggers who have been in the game 15 years, are guilty of this. But there's a little bit of discrepancy. So anyway, with no further ado, let's start. Let's set up a scenario. So look, a good crane driver, crane operator, heaps of guys give me shit for saying crane driver, but I don't know, when I started we were called crane drivers, and then 15 years later everyone takes offence to that. It's just this day and age, people get offended by words. So anyway, a good crane driver, he'll back up and he'll be parallel to the load. So that means he's running this line and then perfectly running beside him parallel. If you don't know what parallel means, the load will be running perfectly beside him. Alright, like this. Another thing crane drivers love to do is they love to get center of the slew, which is there, to center of the load, which we are, because that's the shortest distance to the load. So if it's heavy, you're not gaining more distance. If the crane is slightly forward, you've got to actually reach further to pick the load. If it's slightly back, you've got to reach further. So they're usually parallel, and they're usually center of slew to center of the load. Alright? So that's what usually happens when you're picking up one heavy load and the crane operator sets up his crane. Now what this does is, as we get to the side of the crane, you're a good rigger, alright, here's a good rigger, you're a good rigger and you stand 90 degrees from the boom, okay, and you're here and you're having a look and you're like, oh yep, he might need to jib up a bit, which will just move the load. Alright, now you're here, you're 90 degrees from the boom where you should be, but you're also in the center of the load. Now, this is what happens. You do maybe 10 loads a day and they're all like this. And for some reason, I've done it before, we're all guilty of it, you start thinking that we should be standing, since it's worked 10 times in a day, that you should be standing in the center of the load, because it's worked all this time. And center of the load in this scenario is actually 90 degrees from the boom, so correct. But what happens is, next time you pick a load, this load is not parallel with the crane. And what happens is, some riggers is they'll go over here and go, well, 9 times out of 10 I've stood in the center of the load and I've picked it and it's been perfect. But that's not the case at all. Now you're pretty much picking the guy's slew. You're not actually picking the jib. Alright? And so if you look back here, you should be 90 degrees from the boom tip. You shouldn't be center of the load, because center of the load will put you over here, bruv. And most of the times it's out. Now, if you've got a meter by meter box, you can see the hooks in the center of the load, so that's perfect. If you've got a flat load, like this, and if you pick the jib, because some guys pick up the jib, and I'm fine this way, they bring the hook down into the center of the load and they'll put the chains there, and that means it's center of the load. And that's a good way to do it. But if you've got a container or anything high, you have to rely on the wires of the boom. So what happens is, this is what I do, alright? If you want to go with me, I'll get the chains tight and I say bring up about 2 tonne. And as he's bringing up about 2 tonne, if the ropes go out like that, I know I'm under jibbed. If the ropes go out like that, I know I'm over jibbed. And what I'll do is I'll jib them up until this goes into the centre, maybe come down on the hook again, and then when I think it's right, I'll be down on the hook at this stage. I'll come back up on the hook, and if there's no movement, front or back, that's his centre. And then I say to him, that's his centre, bruv, and then he'll check his radius and lift it off his radius for the whole time until the load's lifted up. That's his job. I've picked it straight. But that's how I do it. So if the load's not parallel to the crane, if it's like that, don't stand centre of the load. If it's like that, don't stand centre of the load. I've had riggers who've done this and the load's like this, and they're over by the crane here, by the cab, standing here, going, oh yeah, your jib's good, because they've fallen into the trap of thinking centre of the load is the right place to stand, which it's not. It's 90 degrees from the boom. 90 degrees from the boom mean you should see the flat part of the tip, side onto the tip, side onto the boom. That's 90 degrees. Pick your side, bruv. Any side is 90 degrees, alright? Do not go centre of load. Like I've said 6 times now, centre of load is over here. Pretty much picking his slew. Hey mate, what are you doing? Good crane operator will pull you up on that. But just be very wary of this, alright? Always be 90 degrees from the boom. Never centre of load. The trap where it is when the crane is parallel to the load and centre of slew is centre of the load. That's when both of them line up. And that's when your brain goes, oh yeah, I just stand centre of the load the whole time. Perfect, bros. It's not, alright? 90 degrees from boom, not centre of the load. I hope this makes sense. Follow these tips. Dow's Rigging and Crane Tips, a 2021, yeah.